Hi, Rama. It's week 7, day 3 of our Bible narrative reading plan. Today we finish Exodus chapter 2 and we also look at Psalm 90. I'm going to look at Psalm 90 first because it's attributed to Moses. It says, a prayer of Moses, the man of God. That is the superscription for this psalm, and we see from the New Testament that these are, in fact, part of God's Word, and they are just as inerrant as everything else in God's Word. And so this Psalm 90 is attributed to Moses. We're not told when he wrote it. It's possible he wrote it during the time that he was in Midian, as we're going to see here in Exodus 2. But it's also possible that he wrote it later in his life, later in his ministry. But this psalm is an appropriate psalm to consider as we look at the rest of Exodus chapter 2, because Moses is reflecting on God's faithfulness. That God is the one true God from everlasting to everlasting, even as life is but a vapor for his created humanity. He is the one that they must rely on, and he is the one who can bless their work and bless their labors. And that's what is seen over and over throughout the life and the ministry of Moses, because the one true God is the only one that they can trust, the only one that they can rely on, and he is the only one who can actually bless their work and bless their labors. And so we do turn to Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 through 25 to finish out Exodus chapter 2. We first saw how Moses was miraculously delivered as a child at the beginning of chapter 2. And now we're going to see again how he's still miraculously delivered, how he is preserved as God is preparing him to be God's deliverer for the people of Israel. And so it says that as Moses had grown up, we're not told here how old he was, but Stephen in the book of Acts, when he gives that sermon that's preserved for us, he gives Moses' age as being 40 years old. And we can trust it because God included it in the book of Acts, that it's accurate and true, even as Stephen would have known it because of Jewish tradition. And so Moses was 40 years old at this time, and he went out and he saw his people. Even though he's been living since a baby as an Egyptian, he's torn because he is very much well versed in the culture of Egypt, but he also knows his people, the Hebrews. And so he sees them fighting. He sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and he strikes the man and actually kills him. Kills the Egyptian in order to protect the Hebrew, and he hides his crime. And then the next day he sees two Hebrew men who are fighting, and he's trying to break them up, it would seem, and they look at him and they say, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Are you going to kill us the same way that you killed that Egyptian?" And so we see that Moses is torn. He is now an outlaw, a fugitive from the Egyptians because he's killed one of them, but he's also not welcomed by his own people, the Hebrews. And so Moses is afraid. He doesn't know what to do, and so he flees. He goes to the land of Midian. Now Midian, the people that are in the land of Midian, they came because of Abraham and his second wife after Sarah died. And so he's there. Verse 15 says he sat down by a well, which is the same thing that we see in the book of Genesis. When someone was looking for a wife, they often sat down by a well, and that's where things began in their relationship. And so we see that the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And this is who we later see named as Jethro, but here his name is given as Reuel, and he's the same man. And so his daughters go home and they tell their father, that an Egyptian delivered us. And so Moses, in his appearance, appears to be an Egyptian, but they soon find out that he's also a Hebrew, and they welcome him in, and Moses actually marries one of Jethro or Reuel's daughters, Zipporah. They give birth to a son, and so we see that God is protecting and preserving Moses even while he's been fleeing from Egypt. And we're going to find out that's about 40 years that he is out there in the wilderness, away from God's people, away from the land of Egypt. But the chapter concludes with three very important verses. I'm just going to read them for you. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. clearly the emphasis here is that God is about to act. It's not that he's forgotten, but this is the way that the text makes clear that even as they've been suffering for 400 years, even as they've been looking for their deliverer, and perhaps some of them have even forgotten about who the one true and living God is, God has not forgotten them. He is about to act. And God has not forgotten you because he has acted. He has sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to save us and redeem us and to sustain us in this life. God has heard you. He knows you. He has not forgotten. Here's a summary of today's reading. For more information, go to tunemyheart.org.